So Max Holloway is going to be taking on the Korean Zombie in Singapore, and this is a card and a fight that I'm really looking forward to. As you guys know by now, Dana White and the UFC did have this big announcement for this fight, and they also announced a couple of other big fights like the fight night in Paris, where Cyril Gane is going to be headlining against Spivak, and also we got the news of Umar Nurmagomedov taking on Corey Sandhagen. In a separate video, I've already talked about that Sandhagen versus Nurmagomedov fight, and in this video, I will talk about the Max Holloway versus Chan Sung Jung fight, or as he is known to the English audience, the Korean Zombie. Now, this is going to be a fun fight. Now, I understand a lot of people aren't really that excited for it. I am. I think this is going to be fun. I do think Max Holloway wins, though, and that's the thing, and that's the kind of reason why a lot of people don't really like the fight, because they can, unfortunately, see Max Holloway getting the volume off, kind of sorting things out early, and then having a lot of success in the boxing, which is probably where this fight is going to take place. Now, Chan Sung Jung, for the most part, he is a decent striker, but he doesn't really wrestle too much. Like, he can wrestle, but he's kind of known for being the Korean Zombie, right? Like, he's a fun striker, he knocks guys out. I remember when he come back, actually, this was my introduction to the Korean Zombie, was in 2017, the very start of 2017, where he took about 3.5 years off for the mandatory South Korean military service and just knocked out Dennis Bermudez in the first round. That was crazy. And that was kind of my introduction to learning who the Korean Zombie is. But Korean Zombie's been around for a long time. You know, since 2011, he's been in the UFC. And he probably is one of the pioneers, I would say, for MMA in South Korea. And you could also make an argument he was one of the fighters that made Asian MMA popular to UFC fans. Now, you could say that's not true because obviously, you know, Japan had a massive MMA base way back in the day, but maybe to the modern era of MMA fans, maybe TKZ was like one of the guys that kind of brought eyes to Asian MMA. Maybe that's not a good take, but you guys can kind of understand what I'm trying to say. The Korean Zombie is one of the more popular fighters in the modern era to come from Asia in the UFC, and I think that is a pretty good statement to make. Now, for Max Holloway, though, the style that this fight is going to take place in is probably going to be a boxing fight. I do think both guys probably will box against each other. Maybe TKZ could go for a takedown here and there, but for the most part, I think it probably will be a striking fight, and I don't really like TKZ in that kind of matchup. I do think Max Holloway will probably be able to figure out the Korean Zombie early and then land a lot of volume, as he kind of likes to do. Now, Max Holloway, I mean, I've been saying it, everyone's been saying it. We are a little bit concerned of the damage that he has been taking in his career. And you could say, well, he doesn't get knocked out. You know, we've never seen Max Holloway get knocked out. But what we have seen Max Holloway do is, unfortunately, absorb the most significant strikes in UFC history without getting knocked down. Now, that is a crazy stat, an impressive stat. But the problem is he still has absorbed the most significant strikes in UFC history without getting knocked down. Like, he's taken that damage, you know, and that is something that you've got to worry about. But he is a young guy, he's up and coming, and I don't think Korean Zombie's going to be able to find a knockout on Max Holloway. Like, Max Holloway still seems to be in his peak, in his prime. He's still looking good. He seems to be the guy that is probably going to beat everybody except for Volkanovski at this point, to be brutally honest. But I don't mind this fight happening. And the reason why Max Holloway wanted this fight is because the Korean Zombie is like one of the featherweights that he hasn't fought yet. And especially one of the featherweights where he was champion and back in his prime and doing his thing. He never fought the Korean Zombie. He never got to. And now he gets to fight the Korean Zombie in Singapore. And the reason why this fight in Singapore is important is there's going to be a lot of Asian MMA on the fight card. You know, there's going to be a lot of Asian talent on the card, and we've already got Rinya Nakamura on the card. And Rinya Nakamura, if you guys don't know, I am really setting the bar high for Rinya Nakamura. I have made a whole video about him. I think he's going to be Japan's first ever UFC champion. I genuinely do. I believe that. I really do. But with that being said, we'll kind of move on and just talk about this card, because it's in Singapore. And now that they've had the Road to UFC sort of tournament, they've all of a sudden got a lot more Asian fighters on the roster, and they haven't made their UFC debuts yet. So why not have them debut in Singapore? Would be a good idea. Now, I wouldn't mind this fight card being actually taking place in South Korea. I think that would be a pretty good idea, but I think overall we do have a very good card here in Holloway versus TKZ in Singapore. Just to start off with, we've got a couple of prelims. Waldo Cortez Acosta and Lucas Brzezowski. They can be on the prelims, but you've got Nakamura, Franny Garcia. Fun fight. Nakamura probably wins the first round. If you guys don't know who Brinya Nakamura is and you've got UFC Fight Pass, just watch his fights. Honestly, it won't take you long. He's got like 3 fights on Fight Pass, and I think they all kind of add together to be about less than 3 minutes of content, so I wouldn't be too worried about it being a spender for you. But anyway, the point is, I think there's going to be a lot of Asian MMA on this card. And if you guys don't know, the Korean Zombie's actually taken on quite a bit of a coaching role recently, and he actually owns his own gym. You can see he trains at Korean Zombie MMA. If you've been keeping up with the Road to UFC tournament, which is going on right now, and it took place last year, you'll notice that a lot of fighters from South Korea are really coming up through that gym, and it is a really good gym. Now, unfortunately for the Korean Zombie, I think one of his best prospects out of that gym was Hansel Kim, and unfortunately, he did lose a fight recently. But I do think Hansel Kim, if he won that fight, would have been on this card. I think he would have been signed to the UFC, but he did lose in a Road to UFC bout just a few weeks ago. But he does have some really good fighters on his roster, on his in his gym, that you could potentially see come up through the rankings and maybe into the UFC. Maybe after the Korean Zombie retires, because it seems like he might be retiring soon. But the thing is, when the Korean Zombie does retire eventually, he's not stepping away from the MMA at all, because as I said, he's taking on a coaching role. He owns a gym. He's got fighters underneath him that he is coaching and trying to teach them to be at the UFC level. So you're never going to not see TKZ around. TKZ is always going to be there, even if he does retire, because you'll see a lot of South Korean fighters come up out of nowhere, get signed to the UFC, and you will see the Korean Zombie in their corner, because obviously the Korean Zombie has a lot of MMA knowledge to pass down. He's been in the UFC for over 10 years now, for 12 years now. He's got a lot of knowledge on how to be in the UFC, I guess, that he can pass down to a lot of fighters that wants to be in the UFC themselves. But with that being said, I think I got a little bit sidetracked, but to talk about the matchup, I think I broke down the matchup, how it's going to happen. I think Holloway probably will end up beating Chan Sung Jung on the feet, probably by finish. Holloway isn't a guy, as of recent anyway, that is known to get a finish. He hasn't got a finish in a very long time. Like, his last finish was against Ortega in 2018, but before that, before the doctor stoppage, it wasn't until he fought Aldo back in 2017. So he hasn't got a finish in a very long time, but what he does do is put a pace on his opponents, man. He really puts a lot of volume on his opponents, and I think it is unfortunately going to add up for the Korean Zombie, and I think Holloway will probably win by TKO, maybe in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, honestly. So yeah, give me Max Holloway by TKO in this fight. Late in the fight, though. I think TKZ might have a good first 2 rounds, but I think Holloway is going to figure him out and then eventually kind of get the finish just from accumulation of volume of damage. So let me know what you think of the card. Let me know what you think of the fight. And yeah, let me know who you want to see on this card. There's a lot of good Asian talent on the roster, like Tatsuro Taira could be on this card. You could see guys like Jung Young Lee, who won the Ultimate Fighter last year. You could see maybe Anshul Jabli from India, the UFC's only Indian fighter, fight on the Singapore card. You never know. You could see a lot of different sort of things. I'm looking forward to the announcements that are made for this card, because I do think that we are going to probably get a lot of very good Asian talent coming up in the UFC on this card. So it should be a pretty good card to keep your eye out for prospects from maybe places of the world that you don't necessarily see prospects from. Because a lot of the time the prospect comes up in the UFC, let's be honest, it's usually from either the USA or it's from Brazil. Sometimes it's from Europe as well, but we're not really seeing a lot of Asian prospects come up right now. I think that this Singapore card could be a pretty good opportunity to showcase some really good talent from Asia. So let me know what you think of this fight, of this card. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys so much for watching.